Do you want to win your March Madness bracket pool to win money or make all of your coworkers or friends think you're smart and cool and talented? In this video, you'll learn how to use math and statistics to give yourself the best chance of winning your bracket pool. First off, you need to forget everything you know about filling out a bracket.
I want you to empty your mind.
Empty my mind?
How you make your picks changes drastically based on how many entries are in the pool. We'll break down different strategies for small, medium, and large groups. It is essential to know the size before you begin to fill out your bracket. Before diving into the specific strategies, there are several universal tips to know regardless of group size. Tip number 1, and maybe the most important, know your competition. You can gain a few extra points on the margins by knowing the tendencies of your opponents. For example, is everyone in the group a Kentucky fan? Pick Louisville to win a game or two because your opponents are unlikely to. Tip number 2, know the scoring system. Most of these tips will be for a standard scoring system that gives 1 or 10 points for the first round, 2 or 20 points for the second round, and so on, with the champion earning you 32 or 320 points. Tip 3. Know the payout structure. Are you trying to win or just finish in the money? These tips are going to be to finish first. Generally, you'll want to play it a little safer if your goal is just to finish in the money. Tip 4. NBA players tend to show up in the tournament. This has been proven countless times if you look at Stephen Curry, Ja Morant, Kyle O'Quinn, or even on tournament favorites such as the 2018 Villanova team, which had 7 NBA players on the roster. Take a look at a few draft boards and pay attention to which team has NBA prospects. The last universal tip will be the most obvious one. Pick the correct champion. Picking the correct champion will net you 63 points over the course of the tournament, whereas the perfect first round nets you just 32. You should spend significantly more time deciding on your champion than going back and forth on a trendy 12-5 upset pick. When putting the upcoming strategies to use, you need to work backwards. Decide which team you're going to pick to win the championship first, and then pick the rest from there. So let's dive in on how you pick the right champion. It's important to know the blueprint for championship teams. One thing that you'll hear a lot is defense wins championships. It doesn't. This quote was originally coined by legendary Alabama football coach Bear Bryant. It was never meant to apply to basketball. The team with the #1 defense on Bart Torvik's adjusted efficiency rankings has never won the national title. The last 10 champions have all had a higher ranked offense than defense. If we look at KenPom's database, which goes back to 2002, 14 of the 22 champions have had a top 4 offense, while just 4 have had a top 4 defense. The average KenPom offensive ranking of champions is 6.2, while the average defensive ranking is 9.2. The last thing to keep in mind is the roster's overall talent. Every champion since the 1950s has had multiple NBA players on the roster. While it's impossible to know who ends up playing in the NBA, this, plus the fact that they're built around defense, makes Houston a tough team to choose in 2025. None of their players are considered locks to play in the NBA heading into the tournament. With that out of the way, let's get started with the individual strategies for each pool size, starting with small. If your bracket pool has fewer than 15 entries, it is most important to know your competition. Are you in a group where everyone hates Duke? You can get an advantage by being the only one willing to pick them. Is your group going to be biased toward Alabama? Don't pick Bama, and do send Auburn further than they would be willing to. These are the small advantages you can find on the margins to give yourself the best chance to rack up points. Start off by picking a likely champion. There are 3 teams that are likely to be picked the most in 2025: Auburn, Houston, and Duke. Knowing the importance of offense, we can knock Houston off of our list. Once you've made your champion selection, you are now essentially only competing against the other entrants that picked the same team. You need to rack up points in the early round. It may be fun to pick a 12/5 upset, but does that really give you the best chance to pick up those 10 points? You don't need to go completely chalk, but only pick a maximum of 1 double-digit seed to make the Sweet 16. There's no need to pick any sleepers to make the Final Four. Remember, it's not about predicting what actually will happen, it's about picking what has the greatest likelihood of happening. In a small group, a chalk champion with a mostly chalk bracket will optimize your expected points and give you the best chance of winning. Now moving on to a medium-sized pool of about 25 to 75 entries. In a group of this size, there will usually be at least 1 entry that is mostly chalk for each of the championship favorites. To differentiate yourself, there are 2 strategies to pick from. You can either pick a championship favorite with a bracket filled with a little bit of chaos, or pick a slightly uncommon champion with a mostly chalk bracket. I recommend the second option. The math is clear. Using previous year's data, we can estimate about 10 to 20% of all brackets will each choose Auburn, Houston, and Duke. Assuming your group has 50 players, if you select Duke, there are likely to be about 9 others that also pick Duke. Simply, you only have a 10% chance of winning even if Duke is the eventual champion. Analytics websites currently give them about a 19% chance of winning. 19 times 10% equals 1.9%, even worse than if it were a random draw of the 50 entries. Around 2% of players will pick Texas Tech as their champion, so there's a pretty good chance you'll be the only one to pick them. The analytics give Tech approximately a 3.6% chance to win it all. This means your odds of winning would be 3.6%. If one other person picks them, it's still 1.8%, meaning you can estimate your chances of winning as 2.7% over a 40% increase over the Duke route. Remember, these numbers are hypothetical. There's always a risk of your pool being abnormal. Lastly, we'll look at pools with more than 100 entries. Go crazy with this one. The bigger the pool, the crazier you should be. You can pick a ton of upsets or try to snipe a champion pick that will put you on an island. BYU and Gonzaga would be good options in 2025. While filling out the rest of your bracket, pick a narrative and fill out your bracket as if it were true. In other years, we've seen conferences that were severely over or undervalued heading into the tournament. For example, the Pac-12 in 2021. Finding the right narrative can get you a good chunk of points over the field. Do you think the ACC was sneaky good this year? Do you think the SEC was overrated? Is a team that got hot at the end of the year gonna stay hot like NC State in 24? It's highly unlikely that you will win a pool of this size if you don't do something unique with your bracket. To recap, your picks in a small group should be very chalky. For a medium-sized group, surround a fringe contender with chalk picks, and for large groups, get wild with it. One last thing to remember, you're probably not going to win. During the first couple rounds, don't cheer for your bracket, cheer for the outcomes that you find most entertaining. Once it gets to the Elite 8 and you have a chance to win, then it's okay to start rooting for your bracket. Good luck out there.